Don't Hide the Scars, presented by Pain, Parents and Addicts in Need. On this special episode, we're revisiting some of the amazing law enforcement officers that we've had on the podcast, discussing the addiction crisis, public safety matters, including what's going on at the border, and more. And it was an honor to speak with these gentlemen: DEA Special Agent Bill Bodner, Sheriff Thaddeus Cleveland, who oversees a border town in Texas, and retired ATF Deputy Assistant Director Peter Forcelli.
I'm Flindt Andersen, founder of Pain, Parents and Addicts in Need. I've been in recovery since 2001, and there isn't much I don't know about recovery. And my mission is to constantly tell the truth about addiction, to make the realities of addiction, recovery, and drug culture known, and to drive awareness and advocate change that ultimately saves lives.
And I'm Jason LaChance, a certified recovery coach with a passion for speaking with others and sharing their knowledge to help others seek recovery and maintain long-term sobriety. And this is the Don't Hide the Scars podcast, presented by Pain, Parents and Addicts in Need. Special Agent in Charge, Bill Bodner, DA, Los Angeles Field Division. Thank you for joining founder of Pain, Flindt Andersen, and myself, Jason LaChance, on Don't Hide the Scars.
Thank you for inviting me, guys.
You got it, Bill. We're so glad you're here, man. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I've seen you do so many different press-related stuff, but one of the interesting things that really caught me about your career, and we've been exploring further with some guests, is the occurrences shortly after NAFTA, and that's kind of when your career started.
Right.
What did you kind of see as a change in influx at that time?
You know, so people often ask me about smuggling over the border, and you know, my question back to them is, when do you think smuggling over the Mexico-U.S. border started? And the answer is about 15 minutes after it was declared a border. You know, I don't know when Prohibition was. 1919, 1920. Guess what? There was smuggling of tequila across the border. So smuggling of contraband across that border has always been a huge issue. NAFTA, to some extent, did have an effect because we saw more smuggling in commercial vehicles, tractor trailers carrying freight. Definitely, when I started the job, it was cocaine, and that's how a lot of it came across the border. Drugs mixed with legitimate goods coming across the border in tractor trailers.
Right. Yeah, I even remember those days, you know, where that was, you know, when I'd watch the news, you know, and that's where they'd find them. They'd find them in the wheel wells, you know, of the trucks and cars, and it was just, and they were getting a lot across.
Oh, yeah.
I can only imagine how much is getting across today with fentanyl. Yeah,
it's scary. I mean, that's the number one challenge I think we face in law enforcement right now is the volume of the drug, more than anything else, because fentanyl, it takes so little to kill you that there's really no room for error on anyone's part, especially law enforcement's part. So dealing with that volume, that much of a deadly substance is super challenging right now.
Well, you know, and I hear that there's like, again, I could be wrong, but 70,000 vehicles a day are crossing that border, going back and forth. So
here's the reality, and this is data that Department of Transportation publishes. So it's open, you know, on the internet. Right. The last time I looked at it was for May, so a couple months ago, May 2023. One border crossing in California, the San Ysidro crossing, right? 1,345,000 vehicles coming from south to north, not both ways, just coming into the country. So take an average, guys. That's a vehicle every 2 seconds on average. So when I hear people talk about shutting down the border, and it's a discussion, right? It's a legitimate discussion, but I need to know what that means to you or what that means to the people saying it. What does that mean? Does that mean we spend 10 minutes searching every one of those 1.3 million cars? Because if it does, after 1 hour, that line to cross the border is now 9 hours long.
Right.
And there's people that live in northern Mexico that work in the United States that cross the border every single day. So, you know, just the magnitude of vehicles crossing that border, and that's where the smuggling is happening, in passenger cars and commercial trucks.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, you know, I mean, how do we stop that? How do we even check that? I mean, you could put 100,000 agents, you know, along that border, and you still wouldn't be able to get to all the vehicles.
A lot of it is really reliant on technology.
Yeah.
You know, X-rays, artificial intelligence to track smuggling networks, the vehicles they're using, who is in those vehicles, what other vehicles those people drive. AI in helping identify potential smuggling vehicles is something that is relied upon heavily, and it will be even more going forward. And you know, at the end of it, though, it takes human beings to search. It takes human beings to search, to recover the drugs, to document the evidence, et cetera. So that's another limiting factor.
What about the situations where it's a lot of the precursor chemicals? I mean, Flindt and I watched, was it the benzo dope documentary, where we were seeing it, you know, people ordering the precursor chemicals on the dark web. Are we seeing a lot of that coming across borders too? Or?
So it's interesting. We're seeing now precursor fentanyl chemicals, right, coming into the U.S. and then transiting to Mexico, as strange as that sounds. A lot of the chemicals go directly from China to Mexico. Right. They also transit the United States by air freight and go to Mexico. So are there people synthesizing fentanyl in the United States? Yeah. Yes, there are. But the reality is that any amount of finished fentanyl that's not coming into the United States from Mexico is really inconsequential to our problem. The issue is the vast quantities of fentanyl that are coming into the U.S. from Mexico right now in the form of pills and powder.
Okay. Yeah, I was really curious about that because we were watching, you know, and there's a lady, gosh, what is she, second generation
drug dealer,
you know, and was talking about how, you know, her mom did it and how she's mixing it and everything else. So I was curious if that was an impactful problem, but.
I mean, so that's kind of, from that description, what you're saying, kind of like a mom and pop type operation.
Yeah.
And yeah, that does impact, you know what I mean?
Sure
but
does.
It's not, you know, we're focusing on, our strategy is kind of focus on where the most harm is done. And the most harm is from Sinaloa cartel, Jalisco New Generation cartel, these groups, criminal groups in Mexico that are bringing 1 million pills into California across the border at a time. I mean, that's a significant amount of fentanyl when you consider that 60% of them right now, give or take, according to our laboratory testing, 60% of them contain 2 milligrams or more of fentanyl. So you can see the danger that these big organizations are creating here.
Yeah,
you know?
and for those that don't understand, that 2 milligram mark is the mark of overdose.
Yeah.
You know, you go to that 2 or over it, then your chances of overdose become even greater.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So can you tell us how much impact does the folks that are just coming over the border, what role do they play in a lot of this? And is it true that the cartels are actually targeting people that just want to come into the United States to bring it over?
So here's the thing: is there's no absolutes in drug trafficking, right? Like whatever smuggling method you can think of in your wildest imagination is probably happening. But again, we're focused on how a majority of the drugs are crossing the border. Majority of the drugs right now, fentanyl, methamphetamine, the synthetic drugs that are harming people, passenger vehicle, commercial truck. Are people walking across the border with drugs? Yes.
Sure.
It's not to the magnitude of the other things. So how does that migrant, I don't know what you want to call it, that migrant issue, how does that affect the drug issue? The only way it would affect it really is by diversion of resources. There's a limited amount of resources, federal agents. If you're diverting them to handle that issue, then they're not working the drug issue. And to some extent, you know, I don't know to how great an extent, but to some extent that is going on right now.
Sure. So as much like maybe in the, you know, I'm sure people have seen it in documentaries or you know, recreations, whatever it is, a lot of the drug mules, cocaine is the condoms and swallowing it, things like that. So they're going to find methods at the end of the day. That's just the reality.
Yeah. So they're going to find methods, but they're also going to use the most reliable methods that are working, that can get the largest volume of drugs across the border. And we have to be cognizant that as we address one issue, it's almost like holding a bubble underwater. Right? So let's say we could instantly search every car at the ports of entry through whatever means. We have the ability to do that now. What's going to happen? Boats. We're going to see more ships coming up the coast of California then. We're going to see an increase in tunnels. We're going to see more drones or small aircraft flying drugs across the border. So there is no like one simple solution to it. It has to be all encompassing, because whatever method they encounter the least resistance, that's the way they're going to go.
Sure.
You know, and again, a lot of this boils down to money, because they're going to take that chance.
Yeah.
Because the risk versus reward.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, the risk versus reward and the profitability. I mean, you're talking about pills that cost, I don't know, 13 cents. Yeah. Like a fake Oxy costs 13 cents to produce. And they were selling up here 2 years ago for maybe $20. Right. Now it's down to a couple bucks. There's so many of them. But look at the profitability in that. And if you lose 100,000 of them, you'll make more. You know, that's the kind of one of the key points about why fentanyl and even methamphetamine is so devastating is they found a way to take Mother Nature out of the equation, right? So, you know, to grow poppy plants in Mexico, you have to control, if you're a drug cartel, right, a specific area of the country where the climate is conducive to growing that crop. And then you have to have gunmen there to protect it. And you have to have laborers to work the fields, very labor intensive. You know, they're scoring the poppies, scraping the gum. All those things require manpower, sometimes violence, whatever. A synthetic drug, you don't have to do any of that. You could have a fentanyl laboratory in a garage somewhere, and as long as you get the chemicals, you could move it to any part of the country that you control. So much easier to scale that type of business and not rely on Mother Nature. Yeah.
You know, when you're talking about that, and I know I've talked to a couple other guys about this, the heroin issue as well. Do you actually see heroin being non-existent in the next few years?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's the thing: in some cities in the United States, like I know Philadelphia right now, huge problem with fentanyl, xylazine right now. Right. Extremely difficult to find just regular heroin on the street. So, you know, tell me, what is the user going to do in that situation?
Go to fentanyl.
They're going to go to fentanyl.
Every time.
Yeah. And so that's why, like, a lot of times I feel like, you know, like some of our harm reduction efforts are a couple years lagging. For instance, fentanyl test strips. Yes, if there were people 3 years ago that had the option of using heroin or fentanyl, right? Mm-hmm. That option, let's say that option existed a few years ago. A test strip to them might be valuable. They can make the determination, hey, I just want to stick to heroin, which I know I'm comfortable with, et cetera. Fentanyl test strips today, people are seeking out fentanyl. It's all that's available. So you know, you're not testing it because you're happy to just get something. I hate to say it like that, but that's the reality.
No, that is the reality. Yeah. You know, and it's interesting you said that because I didn't think about that. Because when it comes to fentanyl test strips, I got to tell you, I'm against them, and I'm going to give you my reason. Because I think what we're doing is we're sending the wrong message to our kids.
Right.
Most of the time, it's people that have lost a child, and again, we all grieve for that child and that family. But what kind of message are we sending to little 15-year-old Billy here that says, oh, it's okay to do your cocaine on Saturday night. Right. Here's a fentanyl test strip just to make sure there's no fentanyl in it. I mean, it's the devil on one shoulder, angel on the other kind of scenario.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that scenario you brought up, though, talking about cocaine, because I've always said, and hey, I'm not, you know, I kind of probably have almost the same opinion you do about it, but the person using cocaine wants nothing to do with an opiate.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
If there's any value in a fentanyl test strip, that's where it is. Now, a couple things on that. When we see overdose clusters, like the well-known case was in Florida about 2 years ago, the West Point cadets that were on spring break, and 3 or 4 of them overdosed. We had comedians in Venice, California, down in the LA area. 3 died, 1 survived. Again, cocaine. So in that situation, for someone who's not seeking out the drug, will a fentanyl test strip take what I call the deception piece out of it? Mm-hmm. I think it would.
I think it would too.
But I think one place we've been successful, and it's probably because of the age group of cocaine users now. Like and again, no absolutes, right? But I classify like the coke user as maybe the recreational drug user. And in the LA area that I'm familiar with, that's someone who's, you know, 30s, 40s. They don't think they have a drug problem. They're someone who's going to do coke once a month, twice a month. They're so afraid of fentanyl now that they've actually stopped using fentanyl, and they're so afraid of cocaine now because of the potential mixture or mistaken for fentanyl, that they've stopped using cocaine and they've moved to other drugs. And that's caused a crash in the price of cocaine, where the price is lower in LA now than it's been in probably 20 years. In some places in the country, it's the lowest it's ever been.
Okay.
But that goes to show that we can reach that 30, 40 something age group.
Sure.
You know, where we don't have this success is the teenage to 25 age group.
New Perceptions North, the premier drug and alcohol treatment and recovery center in Central California. A full continuum of medically supervised top quality care with programs for detox and patient residential treatment with dual diagnosis, intensive outpatient treatment, sober living support groups, and more. New Perceptions North provides adult men and women with the highest caliber of professional health care, treating each client with compassion and respect in a safe, comfortable environment to begin the process of recovery to proudly create and sustain a life without addiction. Call 559-978-1507 or visit newperceptionsnorth.com. Welcoming to the Don't Hide the Scars podcast, the Sheriff of Terrell County, Texas. Mr. Cleveland, how are we this morning?
Hey, good morning, and thank you all for having me. It's an honor to be on your show, so thank you.
Absolutely. I know you and Mr. Andersen had a good correspondence the other day, so we've got just a multitude of areas to get into. Flindt, where would you like to start, or would you like me to start? What do we got?
I'll tell you what. First of all, Sheriff, we just converse here. Okay, is what we do. We just let her all fly, and we kind of like it that way. No holds barred. So first of all, thank you for doing this. We all know how important, protecting our border is. And you guys, I just can't give you enough credit. And, we do support you. There's lots of people that do, by the way,
Yes, sir.
and we appreciate you. So, again, I just kind of want to start out by saying in reality, what are you seeing there? I mean, let people know it's coming right from the horse's mouth.
Yes, sir. And to give you a little bit just about myself, so folks know and know where I'm coming from on this issue. So where I'm the sheriff at is my hometown. It's where I grew up. It's where I graduated high school. It's where I came back to 12 years ago to serve as the patrol agent in charge of the Border Patrol station. So I was the commanding officer here, and I'd still be out there. I retired at 48, not because I wanted to or I was done. Unfortunately, our sheriff, who had also been a 30-year Border Patrol veteran, Santiago Gonzalez Jr., he had a heart attack at 55 and didn't make it. So I had the time to retire, and it was time for me to take care of my community that raised me in a different manner than I was supporting them at the Border Patrol. But also it gives me the opportunity to support the Border Patrol going forward. And to be honest, I can support them more from this position as sheriff than I could as being their patrol agent in charge. But one more point I want to mention is when I say take care of this community. So I was raised by my grandmother here. My parents were pregnant at 16, had me at 17. Were, that time in American history, free love, drugs and alcohol type stuff. And, my other family my aunts and uncles pulled me out of that situation. I was raised by my grandmother here, but so many families in this community raised me. I was better off than most kids with two parents. So.
Right. Nice. Gotta love grandmas.
Hey, for sure. And I like to build that framework or that groundwork, if you will, because again, I've spent a lifetime on the U.S.-Mexico border, other than my time in the military and then at Washington, D.C. at U.S. Border Patrol headquarters. But what we're seeing here, completely different than what you see on TV and you have seen on TV the last 3 years with asylum seekers, people that are coming to America from all over the world. They're going to Eagle Pass, they're going to El Paso, Lukeville, Arizona, and San Diego, California. What we have here are people that still want to enter the country illegally, undetected, sneak in, and make their journey northward to various points in America, all over America, to work. But when I say enter in illegally, they're mostly from Mexico. The vast majority are Mexican. The vast majority are adult males. We see a few females, and if we see juveniles, they're typically accompanied by a family member. But again, they're from Mexico. And in my interviews, I like to make the contrast that right now, this administration's allowing anybody from around the world to come into our country freely and likely will never be seen again, meaning by an asylum, adjudicator or an immigration judge. That they're in America and they're going to be lost in America.
Right. Right.
But if you're from Mexico, we still send you back to Mexico. And if I had a choice in the whole situation, I'd rather see our neighbors to the south from Mexico. Again, not that they're all good people, because we do encounter some that have criminal records, some more extensive than the others, but they're coming here to work, honestly. And our economy relies on it. The American economy relies on illegal alien labor, whether it's picking produce in California to beef processing and poultry processing in the Midwest, out into parts of the Southeast, and then of course construction throughout of America, cleaning of hotels, and the food industry as far as working in restaurants. So that's what we see here. We see mainly Mexicans that are coming to work.
Okay. Mm-hmm. How about look, I've been noticing a lot lately about men in their late 20s and mid 30s that are coming in from Syria. I mean, that's another concern that I obviously have. What are you seeing about that?
100%, not just Syria, other parts of the world. China's been the big one that we're starting to see really increase. So out in San Diego, where they catch the majority of Chinese nationals, they are now starting to outnumber the amount of Mexican nationals crossing in California.
Wow.
It is concerning. Not that every one of them are going to come here to do something bad, but you still have that potential. And I'm willing to say 100% sure that some of them are being sent here by the Chinese government, and they'll be going to places throughout America. And whether we see something overtly or covertly, something's going to happen. 100%.
Yeah. When I was watching this one piece, and an interviewer was there, and he was talking to 3 Syrian men, and it was interesting because his first question was, how did you get here in order to cross the border? And the guy answered the question. Well, then he asked him another question, and then all of a sudden he went deaf. It was like, oh, I don't speak English. And I'm going, dude, come on, you just answered the first question in English. That's the kind of stuff that really concerns me, because they're lying right out of the gate.
Yes, sir. And further, and you should be worried, because again, a lot of those countries too, to include China, they're not sharing the records, if you will, of these people. We don't know who they are. We're taking their word that their name is such and such, or if they have a passport, even if it is real or it's likely not real, we don't know who these people are. We don't have any database to check their background. So most countries don't have electronic databases that compile criminal information on their citizens. So that's even more concerning, if not the most concerning part.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I thank you for pointing that out, because I think that information that there is a lot of Chinese individuals coming across the borders illegally, and like you said, the numbers are really starting to shift. I don't think a lot of people are aware of that, and let alone those type of concerns. Granted, I know that, hey, the Al Pacino version of fictitious movie, but it did display what happened when we were taking Cubans in by the flood, because some people are going to get tired of doing those menial jobs. And like you said, if they don't have any documentation, well, what's the easiest way by perception to generate a greater income? Oftentimes it's through nefarious actions.
And you're 100%. And there's 2 points I want to make. I'll get off track. So remind me about what you mentioned, the Cubans. But so already in my community 2 nights ago, I got called out at 2 a.m. and there's only 4 of us here at the sheriff's office. We just hired our 4th, and I'm part of that 4th. We're the 10th largest county in the state of Texas. We're 2,300 square miles. We have 54 miles of river with Mexico, but we're not one of the greatly populated counties. We only have about 800 residents. So there's oftentimes we're catching more people out, throughout a year than there are even in this county. But I want to make the point that 2 nights ago, I got called out, 200 smugglers that were here to pick up a group. They were allowed in on asylum, and it's not the first time we've seen people from Venezuela, from Cuba, and from Nicaragua who have been allowed into our country on asylum. And then next thing you know, they're doing those nefarious acts. They're coming into my county to smuggle, and not just here, all throughout the border. But the point I wanted to make on the Cubans, the Mariano boat lift back in the 70s when Castro emptied the prisons and sent them to Florida. A lot of those people are still incarcerated because they're not fit to live in society. I don't have any factual that Venezuela's done the same thing. I've heard that. But for instance, you take that young lady that was killed in Georgia by the Venezuelan last week. It's tragedy. It's horrible. And what I like to say is we're a country of rule of law. Venezuela is not. If you break the law in America, there's a consequence. In Venezuela, there's likely not if you're aligned with the right people or party, right?
Right. Right.
We still have, yes, there's a lot of disrespect for law enforcement, but we still have, we're rule of law. We have respect for law enforcement here in America. Other countries, Mexico, Central America, South America, a lot of these countries, they're so corrupt, the law enforcement's so corrupt that they don't either fear the police, or if they do, they fear they're going to get beat. So when they come here, it's just not the same culture. It's not going to mix well, and we're in for a long time. What's happened over this last 3 years is going to have a long-lasting effect, just like the Mariano boat lift back in the 70s. 50 years removed, and we're still encountering some of these Cubans.
Whether it's in Maine, Rhode Island, Florida, California, Arizona, doesn't matter. We, and I include all of us in this we, right? Law enforcement, district attorney's offices, people like us that have done an outstanding job of making fentanyl awareness a reality. We have got it out there. I mean, if you can't swing a dead cat anywhere without hitting a sign that says fentanyl kills.
Yes.
And so, again, we have done a very, very good job of that. But when I hear, and I'm going back to, this is why law enforcement, even physicians, our lawmakers, and again, please don't take offense to this, most do not understand addiction and or the addict.
Okay.
And this is something that we try to get across to everybody. Fentanyl, look, when you are an opioid addict, that's not an accidental poisoning. We are seeking out fentanyl. When you use fentanyl, when you finally reach that plateau or that level of having to take a fentanyl by itself, that's what you're looking for. That's right. What we need in our bodies in order not to get dope sick. A Vicodin isn't going to replace that fentanyl. A Norco isn't going to replace that fentanyl. When we're out there looking for it, we know that fentanyl is already laced in Xanax. We already know that fentanyl is in an M30 pill. By the way, we're not going to waste our time on a fentanyl test strip. Why would we waste our drug testing it when that's what we need as an addict? We're spending again. I've actually gotten in a little trouble for saying some of this stuff, but I'm sorry. This is the reality. Until people start to understand addiction and the addict and how we think and how our mind works during our addiction, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yes, sir.
We don't. Nobody gets the fact that a 30-day treatment stay ain't going to fix this problem. Right?
Yes. So no, and some good points. And talking about when I interact with people that I arrest or whatnot, we're human. I have my own vices that I can definitely, I think, not completely understand, but comprehend that whole. Sure. Yeah, but there's another group I spoke at that's the Hope Movement Foundation out of Arkansas, and they're working on that, not just that educational piece, but that recovery and having people that are available to work with those people. And it's got another term, and I just don't have it in my mind or at the tip of my tongue right now. But what they're doing is what you just described, that other piece of solving this epidemic. And but then again, it takes me back to when I was in Arkansas and talking with some of those folks that are in the law enforcement piece, and how the cartel, meaning people from Mexico, they may be in the community where there's good people working, but there's those one or two people that are helping bring that pipeline of drugs into rural America, throughout the United States. I mean, their tentacles are just all throughout the United States of America. I mean, it's a deep web for sure.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, at 559-579-1551, or visit us online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Pain Nonprofit. And please subscribe to the Don't Hide the Scars podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. And if you would like to donate to PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, please click the link in the description to make your tax-deductible donation today and help us save more lives gripped by addiction. Peter Forcelli, author of The Deadly Path, How Operation Fast and Furious and Bad Lawmakers Armed Mexican Cartels. Thank you for joining the founder of PAIN, Flindt Andersen, and myself, Jason LaChance, on Don't Hide the Scars.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
You got it, Peter. We're glad you're here, man. We really are. This is going to be good.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just to dig in first, about Operation Fast and Furious, because before we hit record, you said, you don't see working in public safety. I mean, goodness, you had a 30-year career?
35, actually, between two different, 15 years with NYPD and then a little over 20 with ATF.
Okay. Yeah. We love New York cops, by the way.
We do. We absolutely love them. Absolutely love them.
Everyone we've spoken with or met in person, it has always been an honor. But it was really, this is such a wonderful book, and I've been digging through it. But what made you decide that this needed to be put out? Because Flindt and I, our conversations really surround public safety, especially with the fentanyl crisis. I mean, that's our initiative, what we do, and helping people and families of the suffering addicts. What was the point you said, I just can't stay quiet on this?
Well, a couple things, actually. One of which was, look, at the end of my career, I was the head of training for ATF, which was great. By that time I was ground down and just tired of the job, frankly. And so part of my responsibility was training new agents. So 1 week out of every month for roughly 3.5, almost 4 years, I'd have to go down to Brunswick, Georgia, which is where ATF's academy is. And I would speak to the new agents. And every now and then, most people are just happy to have a job, but every now and then somebody would start researching the organization, and, they would hear my name, and, they would have heard about Fast and Furious, and it would be like, hey, what really happened there? And then every now and then I'd even hear from agents that worked in other parts of the United States who would ask me the same question, and what happened was, when we would advocate, hey, why don't we talk about this so it never happens again? Because the old adage, he who doesn't know about history is bound to repeat it, right? We were always told, no, we don't talk about Fast and Furious. It's like Fight Club. You don't talk about Fight Club, which I thought was asinine, because, like I said, you had people that were with ATF during that period who worked in, the other corners of the United States who heard about it, but never really knew what happened down there. And it was important to know because, look, a lot of it was just abandoning the basics of policing. And if you guys were reading the book, you saw that. But a lot of it was also, it wasn't on the agents. I mean, a lot of it was, but a lot of it was because of the decisions made by prosecutors. So I wanted folks to know that. And then another factor was Brian Terry was the Border Patrol agent that was killed with one of the guns that was smuggled during Operation Fast and Furious. And I wasn't involved in that case, the operation. I was in a group that was there before Fast and Furious even started. So I saw what was happening. But I met his mother when I testified in front of Congress, and she was a wonderful woman, very kind. And she just wanted to know, what happened. And the government never told her. And, I've since then, I've got to meet his cousin. I met Brian's, his brother, Kent, has had some phone conversations with him, his two sisters. They're wonderful people, just like people that you'd want as your next door neighbors, just kind, good-hearted folks. And they never got answers. So I wanted them to know what I knew, which, again, I know it's not going to answer all their questions, but I just, for those two reasons, between, educating the agents and giving the Terry family at least some idea of what led to Operation Fast and Furious, those were my motivators, frankly.
Yeah. Well, and to really let people know what it is, I mean, the operation, it's kind of mind blowing as some of the things that you guys do. We won't cover all of that stuff because we'll get into other things. But it's named Fast and Furious because it has to do with the smuggling across the borders of cars that, normally would have been in the Fast and Furious movies, imports, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, no, the case itself, that wasn't named Operation Fast and Furious. That's a nickname that was given to it by the agents that worked on the case. The name of the case was Jacob Chambers and others. Et al. Is the abbreviation they used. Right. But they called it Fast and Furious, because as you just pointed out, the straw purchasers, the people who were buying the guns for the cartels that ATF wasn't interdicting, they were driving those souped up Japanese cars, and that's where the nickname came from. It's just a really dark time in the history of my former organization.
Well, how do you view a lot of, Flindt does a lot with legislators here in the state to try to harsher penalties for fentanyl dealers and everything else. But I mean, you saw it really firsthand, like you said, the gentleman that was a border agent that got killed in this case.
Yeah. Look, I think that people who push fentanyl should be strictly punished. I mean, look, people are dying more so than we lost in Vietnam, more so than we lost in other wars. I mean, right. I honestly think that the Chinese government is doing this on purpose. I sat through it. I sat through training back in 2015 at the Army War College. I was a civilian. I was allowed to attend this training, which was a great honor to be surrounded by all these Army officers about to be generals and whatnot. And they talked about the Chinese have a 100-year plan, right, yeah, to surpass the United States as the world superpower. Don't forget, they were also the victims of something similar back in the days of the Opium Wars. Where,
that's exactly right.
Yep. So, I mean, again, going back to learning from history, right, that we just talked about. So clearly, I think what they're doing is they're working with the Mexican cartels. My understanding is there are Chinese nationals who are actually physically in Mexico working with the cartels on this. And they know that these things are coming here. And it's tragic when you get some kid who may be afraid to get on a plane and say, let me go get a Xanax, maybe never took a pill before in their life. And then they pop one and, thinking it's going to calm them down for a flight or, help them get, over some stress for some other reason, and they never wake up again. And then, of course, you have people who misuse drugs, who have problems, right? That's something that a lot of families deal with. I recently was at the Lost Voices of Fentanyl rally to support a friend of mine, a DEA agent named Derek Maltz, who does a lot for those who lost relatives to fentanyl. So I went there to support him and got to meet some amazing folks who just dealt with a ton of tragedy in their lives. And look, some of their family members or kids were drug addicts who just were fighting the demon that they fight. And it's an illness. I get that. And then some were exactly what I just described. People who didn't necessarily have a drug problem, but popped a pill for one reason or another, and they're gone. So I mean, the fact that our government is doing more really bothers me. I mean, they have all these knee-jerk reactions over so many other things. Now they're talking about banning mentholated cigarettes, for example.
Right.
How about putting some effort into saving some lives? Because this is too much, man. Look, I don't think of it as overdosing as much as I think of it as poisoning. They're being poisoned.
Yeah. Well, Peter, it's interesting you say that because, I've worked with law enforcement a little bit here, and I've worked with a couple folks with DEA, and the interesting fact here, and what I'm trying to get across to our law enforcement people, anywhere from again, boots on the ground to prosecutors, is there are, in my opinion, right now, very far and few between accidental overdoses anymore. We in this country have done an amazing job of putting the awareness piece out there. All the different campaigns around the country and all the different counties of, one pill can kill, and, on and on and on. And I do know this for a fact that some agencies, their phone calls are down now, in respect to overdoses, because again, our society has promoted the use of Narcan, which is a wonderful thing to do. We do it here. It's one of our big initiatives. But Narcan is a Band-Aid. That's all it is. When you're talking about addiction, that Narcan is a life-saving tool, period. Case closed. because what Narcan does is it wipes out the opioid in your system. When you're in an overdose, it removes the opioid. So you have to ask yourself the next question, what does that do? Well, it throws everybody into immediate withdrawal symptoms again. So we've literally had people run out of the hospital to go to the dealer one more time to use. I'm a recovering opiate addict. There is not much I don't know about this. In fact, I've just been invited this morning up to the DEA deal that's going to go on in Sacramento on June 6th, talking about this and dealing with families. You know, because again, a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, yes, that accidental poisoning was there. You hit the nail on the head. The kid that just wanted to have a Xanax, the kid that just wanted to go buy a Percocet and thought it was the real deal, you know, and they wind up dead in 3 minutes. When you become a fentanyl addict, that is now the drug you have to have in your body in order to not get dope sick, in order to, if you even want to consider it functioning, that's what you have to have every day in order to not go into full-blown withdrawals and on and on and on. So, and you're right, China has had this plan for however how long. They're surgical about it, all right? And what we're not talking about now is the treatment side of it. What is the solution? We can give all the Band-Aids in the world. We can give fentanyl test strips. By the way, a fentanyl test strip, there's not one opiate addict out there, including myself in my day, that is going to go through a 3-step process, waste the time on and get rid of a drug to test it, because that's the drug we have to have in our body. Okay. Right. So we have to be able to start giving solutions here to this problem. And our treatment industry in the United States is about as effed up as it's ever been, because we're not providing enough beds for those people that need it. A lot of addicts want the help. They can't get it. They don't know where to go. Right. Yeah. You know, and now I know that there are people in law enforcement, at least in our area, that are starting to understand that process. Okay, because that's the next step that we have to take in this thing. But it's like anything else. When you're fighting the dragon, you don't start by cutting off the tail. You start by cutting off the head. Right. And we haven't even gone after the head on this dragon at all.
No, we're afraid. Look, they're afraid to have difficult decisions with China. And let's be honest, they're afraid to do what they need to do with the cartels. The current president of Mexico, Obrador, is very soft on the cartels. His predecessor wasn't as soft as he is. And look, you know, I hate to get into the politics of things.
I got it.
But the reality is there's no denying that our border is porous, right? You can't have it both ways, right? If it's not porous, then how can you explain all the opioids and all the other stuff that's coming into the country that shouldn't be coming here? Right. Look, the stuff happening in Mexico right now rivals the stuff that was happening in the Middle East. When I talk about the lack of humanity, beheadings, mass graves, kidnappings, tortures, people being skinned alive, literally. I've seen the images of the bodies after they're found, skinned,
Right.
It's terrorism, but yet we won't call them terrorists because we don't want to offend our neighbor to the south, but we're not dealing with them appropriately. And look, DEA, which, does what they can do with their resources. They had a pretty robust presence in Mexico. They had good intelligence networks down there. They had vetted units who were, soldiers who were polygraphed, who they could trust, because trust is something that's hard to find in some parts of Mexico, right? Yep. Obrador put an end to most of that. So, and look, to be honest, people in our administration aren't really pushing back.
Right.
So, until we get our act together, people are going to continue to die. But you're absolutely correct. We're not going after the head. We don't want to offend. And the end result, unfortunately, is losing some bright lives.
Yes.
Because regardless of what people are struggling with now, right? I mean, first off, they deserve to live. Secondly, some people who were dealing with drug addiction descend into a really bad place, and we hope that never happens. But there are others who recover and go on and lead very functional lives. And look, there are some people who do that balance where they struggle with it, but they still can manage to lead a productive life. They're not necessarily in a position where that they're just dysfunctional because they constantly need, to use something. So, I mean, it's just tragic to see some of our brightest taken from us And the government focused on just so many unimportant things and not as focused on this as they should be. But look, I'm glad that law enforcement in many parts of the country are becoming aware. I'll be honest, when I was a newer cop, I didn't realize, that drug addiction was an illness. I thought,
Right.
that it was something that folks wanted to do, So,
Right.
I mean, it's good that the awareness is being spread, and it's good that we're having these conversations.
Absolutely.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, at 559-579-1551, or visit us online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Pain Nonprofit. And please subscribe to the Don't Hide the Scars podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. And if you would like to donate to PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, please click the link in the description to make your tax-deductible donation today and help us save more lives gripped by addiction.